Marcus, what made you decide to write this book on Hungary, and what is it that caused you to be interested in Central and Eastern Europe in the first place?
Well, I was a foreign correspondent in Central and Eastern Europe for a number of years during the Cold War period. So I lived amongst them and I got to know them. I got to know how they were living in difficult times during that period. But also I started to realize what their sort of histories were. And I found this fascinating. And many of them are very warm, spirited people. And I came to like them a lot.
I think people would like to know how you came across this particular story.
Well, I came across it through you, Francis, because you were married to a person with whom I was working for a number of years, and he introduced me to you, and you started telling me your story. And I found this absolutely fascinating and a moving story as well. You started to telling me about your own family, about how you discovered quite late in life that half of them had disappeared in Auschwitz. I started to think this is a marvelous story. And then you led me further into the story because you started telling your own story more fully. Plus you introduced me to your relatives in Hungary, those who'd survived. And you introduced me to the people who you come to know through having lived there for 5 years. And you spoke the Magyar language, the Hungarians' language. So you were the ideal person to lead me into this fascinating story.
People in Eastern Europe have been through some really terrible experiences. How do you feel when you talk to them?
Well, above all, I feel empathy, and I always try to gain their trust to show that I really understand what they've been going through. I feel sympathy and pity at times, and I think that they've been through what's been far worse than what we've been through often in the West. That was bad enough in those years, the first half of the 20th century. But you talk with these older people there and you realize that it was 3 times as bad. And these are just the same people like you and me, just normal human beings. How did they ever manage to put up with this? And I came to admire them a lot the way they did.
Marcus, you've taken the house that was built by my grandfather as a metaphor for everything that's happened in Budapest, Hungary, and Central Europe at large. Can you say a little bit about how that came to be?
I noticed, Francis, that this house was enormously important for you. It was some sort of link between your present and the past, which your grandfather had been through and your grandmother. And this was something which obviously touched you very deeply. And this is where I could see that you yourself were becoming rather obsessed with this, and you just couldn't let it go. And so I found it fascinating to watch in the way that in the end you did let it go. You put it behind you. You digested this whole story and you sold it. And when you go back to Budapest, you say you don't even go and look at it anymore. So it was like as if you'd left a bad home, because that home was, the symbol was your house, but it was also your past, which had many bad things, terrible things which happened to your family. And I saw you put this, it was like growing up, and you were leaving this bad home and saying, I'm now going to move on and live my life. I don't need to be pinned down by these bad memories from a bad home. And I think that this is something of a metaphor, which is an example for everybody in these countries, and even other people who go through terrible experiences early in their life. You showed how one can move on.
Your book deals with trauma and obsession. Is this becoming a speciality of yours?
Well, I have written also about other parts of Central and Eastern Europe and Germany too, where they went through similar sort of traumatic experiences, terrible experiences. However, I wouldn't say that I'm obsessed with the whole theme of obsession. But what I do find is that I notice that a lot of these people, they went through great moral dilemmas. They had a choice: I can go left or I can go right. And which way do you go? Both may be wrong. So what do you do when you can't sit on the fence? And they were forced to take these sort of decisions. And I admire them. Many of them took very good human decisions in those times.
And what do you think can help the people of Central and Eastern Europe now to get over these traumas and to move on?
What would help them is if they face up honestly and fairly to what they have actually done and what they have been through. And I think the example is you, Francis, because you went through all of this. And you didn't sort of find it easy either, but I did admire that you had a great deal of honesty and you didn't shirk the difficult questions, and you kept at it with persistence, and you kept on thinking, what do I really make of this? And I think this is an example which all the people of Central and Eastern Europe who've been through these very difficult times, which really only ended 20 years ago, you set the example for all of them.
Well, that's very flattering, thank you very much. But what about the lessons for the rest of the world? What can we draw from all of this?
I think we should realize that these people are much like you and me. We live here, we're sitting here in London talking about this, and they live on the other side of the continent. But they're very much the same sort of people. If you look at photographs of them 100 years ago, you see the same sort of families, the same sort of people going through the same sort of experience as us. They're all Europeans, and I think we should feel a lot of solidarity with them. But what I would like to see is that they should learn how not to deal with their difficult past just by conflict. That is the tendency which I see there, and they interpret democracy as just meaning an opportunity to fight with each other. One day they have to find their way to get through these very difficult pasts and digest them in a way where they come to some sort of narrative which they can all more or less agree upon. This is not easy, but I think this is the task which they have ahead, and I'm sure they will get there in the end.
Can we look to the future, Marcus? I'd like to hear your thoughts on where Hungary is going now and what it will evolve into.
I think Hungary is at the crossroads now. It's always been a special country, and it's been very conscious that it's a special country in the middle of Europe, different from its neighbours. And I think this is something admirable. They were very proud of their history, and they were right to. But they also had some terrible things. The fact that Hungarians collaborated in sending 500,000 of their people to their deaths in Auschwitz and elsewhere is, I think, one of those things which is something which they need to face up to in the end. I think that one can perfectly well do this. Germans managed to get over doing something far worse than any of the Hungarians ever did. But I look at Hungary now and I still see the country torn in conflicts between those people who toy a little bit with anti-Semitism there and blow on the flames still of the embers. And I think that you also see that there's on the other side the ex-communists, those on the left, and these two sides just spend all the time fighting with each other over past history. They need to be thinking, what is Hungary's place going to be in the middle of Europe, now a member of the European Union and NATO, and becoming an open country to everybody else. And they will get there. But this is the way forward, I see, for Hungary.
Marcus, I'd like to thank you very much for writing this book because, as you know, when I left 5 years of living in Budapest in the year 2000, I very much wanted to have people outside of Hungary, outside of Central Europe, really understand the difficulties that these countries faced. And as a publisher, I really couldn't write it myself. And I'd just like to thank you for doing a wonderful job in making the story come alive, and hopefully it'll explain a lot to readers who I'm sure will be enjoying the book.